What is going on, guys? It's your boy Edward, and today we're going to talk about this new CBS news posting or news video that's on YouTube. If you wanted to watch it, I'll put the link down in the description.
In Health Watch, intermittent fasting is a popular diet trend that could help you lose weight and improve your health.
And if you haven't seen my previous video on CBS News tackling intermittent fasting, I do recommend to watch it, as they actually touch on intermittent fasting in a negative light, and I break down the many reasons why they're actually wrong in that interview. It's a pretty interesting take on how I felt about the intermittent fasting protocol and how they were breaking it down. The difference with that video, that CBS News video that I did a rebuttal to a few months back, and this video, is that they actually are connecting what they're talking about to a study. So this CBS News video was interviewing a doctor by the name of Netta Ogden, and I didn't want to get that name wrong. Yes, Netta Ogden, and she talks about this new cohort study that came out looking at the alternate day fasting setup, which is a 36-hour fasting period, and it contains a 12-hour eating period. One thing that I love about this alternate day fasting protocol and this study is that they actually had the participants not eat anything at all. So there wasn't a 25% caloric intake during the fasting periods, and then an increased percent in the fed period just to match the control group that has breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They didn't do that. What they did is they looked at the participants, and this was a retrospective cohort study. So that means that they looked into data from the past. So just keep in mind, cohort studies look at things that can cause diseases. They're like this kind of overview, grand overview of subjects, but they have limitations. A retrospective study, for example, it can have an embedded control, which this has an embedded control, which means they controlled for it, but they controlled for it when it already happened by matching things that were very similar. So keep that in mind, that is a limitation for this study. However, this study saw that beta hydroxybutyrate release was improved even when they were eating. So it improved because of the fasting and even carried on to the times when they were eating their food. Another thing that they saw is that cardiovascular signals also improved, as well as cardiovascular disease risks decreased. So it's a pretty good study. They're going back and forth in their discussion about intermittent fasting on the CBS newscast, and they're talking about how can people implement it. And in this study, they ate whatever they wanted, and yet they still lost weight and they still saw improved markers. And they're actually talking about it in a positive light. Unlike the previous video, in this video, they're talking about it in a positive light because this is a cohort study. So because it's a cohort study, and cohort studies are designed to be this grandeur study that looks at potential disease risks and tries to see what's the mechanism. It's one of the better epidemiology studies system that exists. So because of that, they're now kind of looking at it with more of an eyebrow raise, as opposed to just dismissing intermittent fasting altogether. They mentioned the other protocols like the 16-8, the 5-2. You know, I'm not a fan of the 5-2, considering the fact that allows you to eat during your fasting periods. So I'm not a fan of that. And I'm not a fan of modified alternate day fasting because it allows you to eat during your fasting period as well. So I'm happy that they looked at alternate day fasting without modifications. They didn't dive too deep into the study. These stats that I've given you are from the study itself. They weren't really talking too much about it. They were more talking about the psychological aspect, if someone could do it, and that the study showed that it's very doable. Also, one thing, a lot of people say, well, you know, there aren't really studies out there of more than 6 weeks or 7 weeks of people being able to do these things. So for long term, we don't know. This study looked at 6 months of intermittent fasting using alternate day, which is 36-hour fasting intervals. And they looked at it for more than 6 months, and the results were still positive. There wasn't any detriment. Even fat to lean mass ratio was improved as well. So I mean, for all those people that's telling you can't fast, you can't do it, don't do that 16-8. 16-8 in terms of it being detrimental for you is nothing compared to 36 hours if you're going by how long someone is fasting. But this study, it's a cohort study, an epidemiology study that looked at more than 6 months, and the participants were still just fine and still had improved biological markers. So I like that about this study. One thing though is that this study does not use isocaloric intake. So they were eating a ad libitum setup, which means that they were eating as much as they wanted. But one thing that cannot be overlooked is that when people are given the ability to eat as much as they want, they tend not to when they're doing intermittent fasting. They don't compensate for the times that they didn't eat, which makes weight loss and managing weight loss and controlling caloric intake much, much better because they automatically do it. People will automatically do it. One big thing that a lot of people like to put up against intermittent fasting is that you're just starving yourself, and by the time you start eating, you're gonna eat your entire kitchen because you're so hungry. But study after study after study after study always shows that when all of the participants, the control group eating 3 meals a day, the intermittent fasting group having intervals of fasting and intervals of feeding, when they're told you have no restrictions, you can eat as much as you want, they always eat less. They can never compensate, or they never choose to compensate because they're just ravishly hungry and they're just gonna go ahead and eat the entire kitchen, as the naysayers of intermittent fasting like to say. And they can point at that particular response to the protocol and dismiss it as the calories aren't the same. Yes, although there are studies that show isocaloric and show benefits for intermittent fasting in terms of fat loss, in terms of improved health marker, we still can't overlook the fact that that is a benefit because psychologically there's something there. You're not overcompensating for the fact that you're not eating, you're actually undercompensating. So that is a benefit because it helps you control your caloric intake. If you're someone who finds yourself constantly eating above your calorie intake because you have all the time in the world to do so, and you implement an intermittent fasting protocol that helps you mitigate that, that's a benefit. Intermittent fasting is creating that benefit. Regardless, if you want to look at all of the studies and say everything's the same, regardless, this is creating a benefit. There is a benefit being created there because of the time restriction. And after the 6 months, no adverse effects were seen. So the CBS newscast was okay. They didn't dive deep. They do that type of thing when they talk about intermittent fasting. It's like they just talk about it on a surface level. They don't really dive into the study itself. They talk more about the things that are going to trigger an emotion to someone who probably doesn't know much about intermittent fasting. They talk about, how can someone do this? Is this even possible? Is this starving? Is this healthy? Those are the kind of the talking points that they put up, or the questions that they ask during those kind of interactions when it comes to intermittent fasting. So it was kind of dry to me in terms of how they spoke about it, but the study itself is insightful because it's data. It shows that intermittent fasting is far from unhealthy, and it is actually the opposite. It helps promote many biomarkers that show that health has been improved, and the participants ate 37% less calories than their embedded control group, the control group that was added on to match what they were doing. And this only happens because of the intervention of intermittent fasting. They wouldn't have done it any other way. Also, one other thing to keep in mind is that they ate whatever they wanted to eat. There was no controlling what they ate. Some people ate unhealthy, some people ate healthy. Eating healthy is always the best route to control leptin and ghrelin levels and satiety. You always want to eat healthy, and also to get more nutrition in and get a bigger bang for your buck without getting in too many calories. So it's always important to eat healthy, of course, but you can still see the effects of intermittent fasting, the positive effects still show itself through, or still shine through, even when people are not eating the healthiest. So just wanted to talk about that. Somebody sent me the video and I wanted to give my thoughts on it. In terms of the newscast itself, I didn't think it was touching on this study very well. I thought it was just very surface level, and hopefully I gave you more of an insight to what the study actually is and what it has, some of the methodologies that were used, and hopefully that was insightful for you. Pretty good news. Data is data. No matter what the limitations are, data will still be data. So I'm happy that the study came out. The study was released in the Cell Metabolism Journal on August 27th, I believe, so not too long ago. And it's a pretty good study, pretty good data to move the conversation forward, to look at intermittent fasting when you completely allow the person to fast 100% and not this modified version of 25% here or 40% calorie intake versus the caloric maintenance level. Those studies just drive me nuts. So I'm happy that a lot of the researchers are moving towards zero caloric intake during the fasting period. So let me know what you think about it, guys. Let me know what your thoughts are on this study. I'm going to link it down below if you want to take a look at it. I'm also going to link the CBS clip down below if you want to take a look at that for yourself as well. And of course, I want to thank my patrons from my Patreon. I'm going to go ahead and put their names right up here. And as always, guys, I'll see you on Sunday for another FAQ. Peace.